everyone, and welcome back to Witch on the Holy Night. Sorry about that. I hope everybody's having a good day and a good week so far. Please do let me know in the chat if the volume's either too high or too low, both the music, the dialogue, and or myself. Sorry. Clearing the throat there. All right, well, let's just jump right in where we left off, shall we? Night of the Witches. All right, well, next episode. So, Chapter 5, Night of the Witches 1. All right. Shojiro returned to his apartment on foot, as per routine, under a blanket of clouds in the night sky. The stairs of his apartment building clanged with each step. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see the bicycles parked by the apartment building's outer wall. He debated the pros and cons of a bicycle, how much easier life would be versus the expense, the convenience versus the necessity, but in the end decided one was not right for him just now. Clutching the bag of apples under his arm, he took out the key to his residence.
あれば便利だけど、なくて。
He tilted his head in confusion. More and more he found himself preoccupied with such random thoughts, when the real issue at hand was deciding what to do with the apples he'd received. He placed the paper bag by the sink and switched on the lights. It was just after 10 in the evening. With the end of term exams just around the corner, he had come home an hour earlier than usual. As he made back for the kitchen to pick one of the apples to snack on, he found an envelope stuffed in his mail slot. The envelope had no name, return address, or stamp. Inside was a single piece of paper that had only the sender's name and a short message. It read,
話があるので、今夜どこそこのここに来られたし、大事なようなので、来るまでずっと待っている。言うまで。
A concise set of orders neatly written. It was signed Aoko Awazaki. She had been considerate enough to enclose a detailed map of the meeting place. Puzzled, he cocked his head to the side and then headed out the door. Not sure this is a wise idea, Shojiro. Afterward, upon the room's sole tenant leaving the premise, the envelope burst into flames and evaporated without a trace, as though it had never existed in the first place. By the late 80s, Japan's post-war economic boom had somewhat stabilized, and the city experienced a period of steady growth. The city's modernization marched on, and the Japan Railway train station, a symbol of the new era, neared completion. In Mizaki's neighboring town, Yoshirogi, a new symbol of its own was about to be born. Yoshigiri, bred in Kirshtiland and Kitsyland. What? I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean, but anyway. It was Mizaki's worst investment. Years later, it would be dubbed the fool's gold of the economic bubble, a relic of a bygone age.
この町には夢とか遮奪さが足りない。
Well, damn. 10 years ago, Yoshigiri's renowned Tokisu Baking Company ran factories all across the nation. Its proprietor was a middle-aged gentleman, then aged 56, by the name of Yurihiko Tokisu, known affectionately by most as Topan. He took it upon himself to begin development on an estate on the outskirts of Yoshigiri and broke ground on a recreational wonderland he'd hoped would be the pride of Mizaki City. The long-awaited opening came in 1981. After 3 years of investment, this local amusement park, full of kinds of hopes and dreams, began its short-lived tenure. It covered more than 85 square acres. Damn, that's actually pretty big. Its magnificent merry-go-round dazzled all who passed through the park's gate. Its roller coaster twisted and turned about the edge of the park like a writhing Japanese dragon. Its Ferris wheel, packed beyond necessity with gimmicks, was said to have tested the limits of modern engineering.
完璧だ。遊園地に必要なものは全て積み込んだ。
Old Yurihiko looked upon his creation and smiled. Only boosting his confidence was the fact that the ground opening was staged during a period of prosperity, the springtime of the world. But, in spite of this, they splendidly miscalculated the balance between aspirations and sophistication. Its mascot, Kitsy, was poorly designed and appeared like a cheap knockoff. The park was stuffed to the brim with bread stands. Even in its impossible to navigate mirror maze seemed out of date from the start. There are no dreams to be had at Kitsy's land, only nightmarish satire. Numerous trade magazines lambasted Kitsy's land shortcomings. Customer attendance declined. There was even an incident where a 6-year-old strayed from his mother and had accidentally and nearly died. 1986, 5 years after the park opened, the situation had grown from bad to worse, and the park was hemorrhaging money. On top of everything, Yurihiko, who had bet everything on the success of mascot Kitsy, retired, and Kitsy's land's aspirations were officially in trouble. And thus, amidst the scorn of nearly all residents of the area, ended Mizaki City's one and only amusement park. What's more, perhaps best described as a footnote to its debacle, the self-proclaimed Parisian artist who designed the mascot, Toki Ulick, was said to have snapped his brush in mourning over the closure of the park. Returning to the present, it was midnight, and the Kitsy land of today was a shadow of its former glory. Like a doll abandoned in the corner of a toy box, the lonely park was illuminated only by the light of the town that continued to live around it.
なるほど。
Shojiro closed the Yoshigiri guidebook that he had picked up on the way here. The story of its history was almost difficult to believe, but he supposed this was what people referred to as entropy. The park's front gate was unlocked. When he worked here the previous time, the iron fence was locked shut with a rusty chain. But the chain was nowhere to be seen, and the gate was left ajar. Following the map drawn in the letter, Shojiro quickly made his way inside.
急ぎのようなんだろうけど、こんな夜中に何なんだ一体。
Shojiro complained, quite out of character for him. It was probably because, in spite of his naivete, even he knew that something was amiss. Though the park was abandoned, this was still trespassing. Unlawful entry, larceny, burglary. These were certainly not things or perhaps crimes that Shojiro was proud to do, but...
すまない。お金は払えないんだ。ただで入って申し訳ない。
Money apparently was why his conscience was gnawing at him. He clapped his hand in apology toward the statue of Kitsi, on whose eyes the paint had begun to aptly dissolve. Shojiro passed the mascot bleeding red paint from its eye sockets and began to walk the park. Well, it paints a rather depressing picture, I gotta say. The building's colors had faded. The collection of machines was rusted. The man-made residents no longer felt the passage of time. Even the ghosts themselves could not endure the disparity between this forsaken place and its previous grand stature. It was like a fossilized dream. These were the ruins of paradise, both created and abandoned by man and reality. The economy had stabilized, and the standard of living was on the rise. Nobody was overly concerned with the future. These were the remains of a wild and exciting era. His breath turned white wisps before him. Shojiro continued through the abandoned amusement park. Though void of human presence, this was not entirely as frightening as the darkness deep in the mountains. City suburbs can take many different forms, but Kitsyland was unusual for an amusement park, insomuch it had been built adjacent to a residential district. The park was surrounded by forest, but even that ultimately was man-made. It was no different from the curtains on a classroom window. If he were to scale the iron fence encircling Kitsyland and break through the 20 yards of forested trees, he could make it back to the familiar townscape. Though the amusement park tended to arouse dread in the city folk, to Shojiro it was little different from the commotion and terror of downtown. Poor Shojiro has no idea what he's walking into. The central plaza was silent as a grave. According to the map, the meeting spot was west of here. Waiting for Shojiro at his destination was a rugged, imposing, magnificent castle towering before the backdrop of the cloudy night. Even for an abandoned park, it was a remarkable structure. If the roller coaster and Ferris wheel were loud, intense attractions, this was comparatively quiet and easygoing. It was one of Kitsyland's 3 iconic structures, and in a way, the wicked fortress that guided the paradise down the path of closure. Generally speaking, amusement park mazes generally fell into one of 2 categories. Labyrinths which disorient visitors with their sheer size, and mirror houses which disorient visitors with optical illusions. Many of the labyrinth's guests enjoyed a brief sense of adventure that it afforded. Over the years, however, it would be usurped by the ever-increasing thrills of new attractions. Such was the way of all trends, the curse of fads. The new must give way to the newer. On the other hand, the House of Mirrors was a time-honored, beloved staple. Even with the confines of the classroom's dimensions, well-placed mirrors and well-directed light could both perplex and delight its visitors. A figure in the cost of maintenance, a well-designed House of Mirrors could far outlive its labyrinth brethren. Even if both types faded into obscurity, they would remain a staple of what constituted an amusement park. However, that didn't mean that combining them would produce double the fun. They didn't. Wow, they combined a maze with a House of Mirrors. That is a terrible idea. Together they transformed from entertainment into an uncanny realm from which those who dared to step within could never leave. In a similar sense, Kitsy's Mystery Tour Castle was the park's very own otherworld. Indeed, 5% of its visitors ended up requesting staff assistance to get out. Molded after European castles, it was greater than a football field in length, and the interior was further split into 3 floors. Oh damn, that is a hell of a mirror maze. 2 floors above the ground and 1 below, lined with mirrors from top to bottom. Equal parts complex and vast, the maze demanded at least 30 minutes, even from veterans. One visit was all it took to be struck by catoprophobia for hours. Sorry about that. That's large ones like that aren't my forte. It was the labyrinth that now stood in Shojiro's way.
真っ暗ってわけじゃないな。電気とかついてるんだろうか。
It seemed that Shojiro was unaware of what a House of Mirrors even was, concerned himself only with the lighting. He checked the letter from Aoko once more. The letter read, "I'll be waiting in the first floor lobby of the House of Mirrors." That meeting place was definitely in here. There was something to see by at least as he could just make out light faintly through the open doors. Oh, sorry, there was something to see by at least. Wow. Oh, I'm having trouble today. Oh, putting aside his suspicions, he headed toward the entrance. Shojiro, stop being dumb. The sound of his steps against the brick-laid path echoed faintly. He was far from the hustle and bustle of the city. The park's clocks no longer made tick nor talk, and the winter's bite no longer blew in the night. From within the silence, the stillness that would cause an onlooker to hold their breath, Shojiro stopped abruptly at the entrance to the House of Mirrors.
ところで青崎、そんなところで何してるんだ？
He called out, turning back toward the plaza. A sound rang out as if someone had dove behind a garbage can and it fell to the ground in their haste. A short silence ensued. For a moment, the abandoned park returned to its previous hush. Resigned to her having been exposed, the girl appeared from her hiding place. Oh man, I want those boots. I so want those boots. His voice died in his throat as he took in the sight of the girl's familiar face in unfamiliar attire. This Aoko, with her long hair flowing in the breeze, was different from the Aoko that Shojiro knew. The resolute stance and posture she took exuded the strength of her will. She stared directly at him with sharp-eyed, piercing gaze. Her eyes were glowing with a dim, phosphoric light, enough to give Shojiro pause that he might be hallucinating. An icy coldness and a girl's strength. Shojiro lacked a sense of danger, but the sense of imbalance caused even him to feel the malice in the air. It was as though the Yuki Onna spirit of folklore had climbed out from the ghostly story and appeared here in reality.
Aozaki.
Instinctively, Shojiro took a step back. Surprisingly, he was starting to feel concerned. An unpleasant premonition rose to the surface, bringing with it a sense of anxiety. In spite of this, he felt obligated to honor urban etiquette by seeing if she was all right.
その顔を見るに何かあったのかと一応聞いておくんだけど。
Without acknowledging him, Aoko took a step forward. Her figure, this atmosphere, Shojiro found himself recalling a recent memory. His twisted and knotted apprehension melted away and was replaced with growing realization. The girl before him was very similar to someone he had seen before that night in the park, though he had only seen her from behind. With increasing certainty, causing him to swallow nervously, he noted that they might as well have been identical.
何をしていたかって話なら見ての通りよ。ここで獲物が通り過ぎるのを待ってたの。あなたが入ってから私も入って逃げ道をなくすつもりだったから。
Aoko said, perturbed by the swift change in plans.
そうか。待ち合わせ場所は合ってたんだな。
Sojiro was mightily relieved he had not gone to the wrong place. You should not be relieved yet, sir. It was unclear whether he felt confident about dealing with what was to come, or if he had simply failed to grasp the hopelessness of the situation. Aoko ignored his obtuse response and continued.
私はね、しずきくん。嫌いな人とか、憎い人とかは人並みにいるんだ。ただ、ちょっと変なのが敵になるやつの条件でね。
Cold emotion burned in her eyes. Her feet had already moved one step closer to Shojiro. Shojiro's sense of foreboding was growing stronger. Wondering if what he sensed was bloodlust, he retreated another step. Continuing as though they maintained a distance of just 15 feet.
昔から、私は嫌いな相手でも敵と思ったことはなかったの。でも逆に、好きな相手を敵だと思うこともあった。理由は単純。
She held her right arm out. The light about her was no illusion.
当たり前のことだけど。私は、私の感情を乱すやつが敵なのよ。
That's kind of harsh, Aoko. Her arm moved again. It was instantaneous. Something shot past Shojiro in the blink of an eye, missing him by just a foot to his left. Before his eyes, a blue light, something akin to a fireball, had ignited from nothing. He finally understood what was happening.
ちょっと待った。今のは大変見覚えがある。
She ignored his dim-witted reaction. Oh, she's pissed. How did... Missed, huh? Are you sure you missed and didn't miss on purpose, Aoko? Aoko muttered to herself. The fist-size hole the blue thing had made in the House of Mirrors crackled and smoldered. A shot like that could easily cave in a human skull, in addition to burning it to a crisp.
はあ、こんな射程で外すなんて、アリスに見られたら自殺者ね。でも、これで分かったでしょ？二度目だものね。あなたにとっては。
Isn't this already a second chance? Shojiro backed away swiftly. Things were beyond incomprehensible. He was close to losing the ability to think at all. All he could make out was the figure of the dependable student council president, or at least what he had thought was the president, and the memories of the park that night 2 days ago. He had never experienced anything like this, though most people living in a civilized country would have never seen anything like it either. A lethal weapon that could kill with nothing more than the pull of a finger had a way of suspending the ability of its target to determine between not just good and evil, but dreams and reality, past and future. And the more peaceful someone's life had been, the stronger that suspension was likely to be. All that one could think about was the fact that they were alive at the very moment. It was as if he was an unwritten character on a blank piece of white paper. There was no before, there was no after. There was only what came next. This was very common thought process for anyone staring down the barrel of a gun.
あ、命乞いはやめてね。意味ないから。でも、恨み事ならご自由に。
Doesn't strike me as the
殺す側の義
begging
務とし
type.
て、一言一句聞いてあげる。
But by saying it was pointless, she made it sound more like she would not listen to what he had to say. However, Shojiro was in such a state of shock that it did not even enter his mind to speak up. All he knew, for reasons unknown, was that the girl in front of him wanted him dead.
嘘つきにも程がある。飛び丸のバカ、何がそんな生き物はいないだ。実際いるじゃないか、こんなお化けみたいなのが。
Sojiro felt that he had said that out loud. The second blast would come even quicker than the last, so he kept it to himself. His mental expletives stirred his mind from paralysis to mere panic. The response came not from confidence, however. Someday, out of the blue, someone is going to kill me. While it may have seemed like a baseless belief to hold,
でもそうだった。都会には
I mean,
殺人
it's
事件がある。
obviously true, right?
ルールを破れば殺されるのは当たり前だって、ちゃんと教えてもらってた。
To Kyojiro, the situation seemed perfectly aligned with his inexperienced understanding that the city was a cold, pragmatic place. As far as he was concerned, at this moment, being killed by a classmate was not something to be so surprised by. In a society where murder was possible, he was able to accept this sort of situation as natural. Of virtually no concern was the series of events that led Aoko's aggression toward him. The only thing that truly confused him was Aoko's blue fireball. Shojiro swallowed with an audible gulp. To anyone who may have been watching, it was the response of a victim paralyzed by fear.
そういうことよ。ようやく理解してくれたわね。多くは語らないけど、あなたにはここで死んでもらう。魔術は隠匿するものなんて言っても、そっちには関係のないことだし、単に運がなかったって思えばいいわ。大事なのは、私があなたを殺したってことだけだから。
Oh no, Aoko's getting ready to just blast this poor bastard. Done talking, Aoko once again lifted her right arm. There was a hum like a machine. Blue light began to revolve around her arm, beneath her sleeve. This was taking longer than last time, leading Shojiro to believe that it was going to be much stronger than the attack that was still scorching the wall behind him. The realization caused his panic to heighten.
いやなんだ、つまり始末するとかしないとか、あの夜のお化けは青崎だったとか、都会は本当に込み入ってるとか、そういうことじゃなくて。
His thoughts became jumbled. His heart pounded like a hammer. This was no time to be standing still. He was not sure if the girl in front of him was really human, and more importantly, even if he could accept the events unfolding before him when all was said and done.
待て、人殺しはいけないんだぞ。
Yeah, I don't think that's gonna help you here. Even if it was a fact of life in the city, Shojiro was not about to lie down and die.
分かってるわよ、そんなことは。
Shojiro's scream, still entirely oblivious, was just the thing to invoke Aoko's full wrath. Oh damn! Rapid fire! Aoko fired a barrage of magical blue bullets. In an instant, Shojiro dashed into the shadows behind him, into the entrance of the House of Mirrors. He darted feverishly down the hall. After a mere few feet, he was left completely out of breath. This was due to shock at seeing yet another attack, fiercer than the first, that he'd never seen in his life, and because he couldn't shake the thought that if he had moved even a second later, he would be dead. He could not afford to stop. The sound of merciless footsteps closed in behind him.
けど助かった。ここならなんとか。
He threw everything into his legs as he sprinted. A straight, narrow passage about 60 feet long connected the entrance to the main lobby. At this rate, he could just make it into the lobby. He was sure he would be able to find as many hiding spots as he needed.
助かった。
He arrived in a large, open space. This was the first floor lobby. There were 3 passageways. One led to the basement floor, one connected to the first floor maze. The other was a set of stairs leading to the second floor. Shojiro did not particularly care which one he chose, so trusting his intuition, he made a run for the first floor maze when... Oh! Oh god! There's a bounded field there, isn't there? He smacked his head into a transparent wall.
鏡?
A mirror?
ええ、面倒だけど、それならフェアでしょ。追いかける方にも逃げる方にも有利不利がある。
Someone... A somehow cheerful voice echoed in his direction. Yeah, I'll bet Aoko's cheerful about this. There was no need for Shojiro to even turn around. In the very same mirror he had crashed into, he could see Aoko Awazaki's figure slowly approaching.
それと、1階の奥にある出口は封鎖しといたから。結界じゃなくて、物理的に。やりすぎて封鎖っていうより瓦礫？土砂崩れ？どっちでもいっか。とにかく下手に出口に近づくと崩落に巻き込まれるから。生き埋めが嫌なら近寄らないことね。
Panicked by the impending footsteps, Shojiro groped for the wall. He could see the stairs to the second floor. He did not understand what Aoko meant earlier, but he at least knew that the first floor was not going to save him.
ま、私としてはそっちのが助かるけど。形式上、事故死の方が後始末とか楽だから。
Wow. Aoko is so cold. Behind him was a creature beyond words. As she continued her idle taunting, she lifted her right arm, ostentatiously. Even from above her clothes, one could see some kind of strange, incongruous pattern upon her body. The veins beneath her skin. They made it seem as though something inhuman was circulating her body. Well, yeah, something kind of inhuman is. It's called a magic circuit. Whether out of pity or repulsion, Shojiro stopped for a moment. His pursuer evaded his gaze.
ああ、これ？普段は塗り薬で隠しているんだけど、今日は特別。魔術刻印って言ってね、魔術師の証みたいなものよ。ほら、光が回ってるでしょ？これがさっきのスナップ。わかりやすく言うと弾丸の元。今日は調子いいし、私、魔力を効率よく使うのだけは自信あるし。あと30回ぐらいかな。さっきみたいな装着ができるの。
Only the snap is far, far more powerful than the Gonder curse. Perhaps she was on an emotional high, for her voice had become frightfully friendly. The substance of the conversation could not have been any more unsettling, however.
そもそも何を言っているかよくわからないんだけど、青崎。
わからない？弾数はあと30発ってこと。
Why would you even tell anybody how many bullets are in the barrel of that? Like how many bullets you've got? Like,
そこまで逃げ切ればあなたの勝ちよ。とりあえず、今日のところはね。
If you get away before I use up all 30 shots, you win. For today, harsh.
今日はって明日もあるのかな？
Yes, you'll have to do this every day. You poor bastard, you. Kogiro knit his brows. Aoko's expression creased into a scowl at his behavior. Although he was panicking, it seemed that deep down he still did not feel the full weight of this crisis. She knew he still didn't get it.
宣言はしたわ。自由時間はこれでおしまい。まだ罵り足りないだろうけど、ま、その手の時間はキリがないしね。この辺りで諦めて。
Feared Aoko had prepared this theatrical dialogue ahead of time. Not to allow her opponent time for futile pleading, but to give him the time to curse her as his killer. Such forethought was her mundus operandi. With this victim, however, it was not going as she had hoped.
とにかくそういうことだから。
He's not gonna curse you for killing him. He's gonna keep trying to talk you out of
狩り
it.
の時間と行きましょうか。
Shall we begin the hunt? Hardcore. Her voice was void of emotion, and her eyes ruthless as they bore into her prey. This time, Shojiro finally accepted that he was going to die. Silent as the dead, it stepped into the remnants of a dream that had long seen no visitors. There was no wind this night, nor a soul to be seen. Still, it heard the echoes from within, clasped its hands together, and grinned. Its form, with hands clasped, resembled that of a budding tulip. The bearing of this artificial flower reflected the cloudy mirror of the ticket attendant's office next to the gate. Next to it stood a display board corroded by years upon years of rust. Number of visitors today? 2. Of today, the board had been graffiti cruel scrawled atop one of the words. It was replaced with deaths. The records board had long ago fallen into disrepair. After taking the full 10 seconds to digest what he was looking at, it made its own revision. Number of visitors today? 3. Number of deaths today? 1. After appending this number with an index finger, she smiled like a flower. Then she began to walk toward the source of the sound. It had been 10 minutes since this rhapsody had begun to echo from the House of Mirrors. The amusement park's entrance returned as it was before, soulless. In the end, even if Shojiro had been the luckiest man alive, there was no way he should have been able to escape. The question, however, was how much of this was by design, and how much was sheer coincidence. Even Aoko, who had made all the arrangements, had no answer. Indeed, there were only 3 things she could say. It was taking longer than expected. He was putting up more resistance than she had anticipated. And that choosing the House of Mirrors had been a mistake. She had really screwed the pooch on this one. The location itself was an excellent choice, as the House of Mirrors was perfect as a hunting ground. But seeing her own incompetence reflected in the mirrors was beginning to grate on her. The moment Aoko's right arm began to glow, Shojiro made a beeline for the staircase in front of him. A strobing series of blue flashes lit the room behind him. The hunter calmly followed her prey, and the prey desperately ran for his life up the stairs. Oh my god, what a wicked grin! Oh, she's having too much fun.
そうでなくっちゃお膳立てした甲斐がない。
In stark contrast to Shojiro's frenzied escape, Aoko walked briskly up the stairs. She elected not to run after her prey in order to maintain a set distance. Yeah, to be a cruel, maniacal woman. As she lacked confidence in her accuracy, she would be the most challenged if Shojiro bull rushed her and went down fighting. But at a distance of 30 or so feet, he posed no threat. By the time her prey drew near, she could fire 10 shots at it with at least 4 of them. Oh, and hit with at least 4, my bad. Their positioning just a moment ago had been ideal. At this distance, in a space this open, there was a chance, however small, that it could turn into a fistfight if he flanked and charged her. Currently, Aoko's best weapon was the bullets from her right arm. She was going to capitalize on that advantage, and it was in her best interest not to close the gap between them. If there was a good time to approach, it was only after her prey had become exhausted and had lost the will to continue. Would she pierce his leg? Shoot him in the back? Or perhaps would he just give up after losing himself in the labyrinth? The hunt would end when her target sustained some sort of injury and became unable to run. On Shojiro's end, he could barely bite back on screaming as he bolted through the maze. Even running in a straight line had become difficult, much less searching for an exit. Ouch! Ran into another mirror! The corridor stretched out far before him, or so the mirrors blocking the path had made it seem. Panicked, he made a turn to the right. And face full of mirror. Clutching his head in his right arm, Shojiro led with his left, groping through the air to see whether a wall was there or not. He dove down the hall to the left, narrowly dodging the bullets targeting his life. Urged on by the sound of approaching footsteps, he ran without thinking. That last one was close. A hair closer would have meant his life. He caught the odor of burnt hair from the back of his neck. He was very lucky. Or perhaps very unlucky. If he were actually lucky, he would not be in this situation in the first place. I suppose that is one way to look at it. The second floor of the House of Mirrors was structured like a giant spiral. It wound left, starting from the outside wall. Eventually, it would lead to a dead end. The more he tried to escape, the more cornered he would become, as though he were trapped in a twisted guillotine. His stifled screams threatened to leak out as complaints. No matter what he did, he was going to be killed. All of his struggling merely served to prolong the inevitable. Yet he ran. No matter how many mirrored walls he rammed himself into, he ran. Even after crashing so hard that his forehead bled and he saw stars, he ran. Pain shot through him at every turn. The more frantically he ran, the more intensely he smashed into the invisible walls. His body began to understand this rule and begged him not to run anymore. His breath was already ragged after sprinting a couple of 100 feet. No matter how he thought about it, this was not normal. This was way too crazy. This was all just a bad joke. If he turned around now, she would apologize to him for taking it too far. His mind had gone blank. As his body continued to slam into the mirrors again and again, his feet slowed as they began to believe that perhaps it really was all a joke. But then he felt a chill, a touch of death upon his neck. It would not be an exaggeration to say that Shojiro knew this kind of terrible chill far too well. Ever since he had arrived in the city, he had come face to face with more than one or two near-death experiences. For someone who did not understand city life, his present predicament was not unlike when he had experienced the traffic on the streets or the commuter rush on the station platform. He was far from an innocent babe, unable to comprehend life or fear. Rather, everything he had ever known became irrelevant when he was flung into a completely different cultural sphere. Even society's promise of safety, something urbanites took for granted, were threats unknown. So he was used to this already, though if he were to be honest, he was dissatisfied with some things. Things superfluous to necessity. This world was overflowing with valueless things, and they were all dangerous in some way. Even the everyday necessities sold at the convenience store were, as far as he was concerned, amazing tools. Civilization had raised the standard of living so high that it had numbed humanity's sense of danger. The city's constant pursuit of wealth and convenience was a poison to a country boy like Shojiro. And he did not have the capacity to accept these conveniences. It was possible for such convenience to easily and subtly be misused and caused unintended accidents had always made him anxious. Why? He had to wonder why he was even here. How ironic. It took the real threat of death to finally make him realize, like a divine revelation, what he'd failed to understand until now. He always had to expect the unexpected. Near-death experiences were more common than one might think. To begin with, safety was something that came at a price. Being alive meant that the opposite was always lurking around the corner. It was just like a streetlight at night. When the sun rose, its illumination would naturally disappear. Another barrage of strange projectiles whizzed mercilessly by him. He recalled in the back of his mind the charred remains of someone at the hands of that blue flame 2 nights prior. Somehow this situation reminded him of a horse being led by a dangling carrot. For now, he lifted his head and continued to run through the labyrinth. But for what purpose? Though he knew the pain in his chest was very real, he felt disconnected from it. The night sky visible through the skylight was a muddy ultramarine, no longer resembling the one he knew. And managed to calm himself. Shojiro began to laugh in despair, as though something rather precious had been broken. Everything had become meaningless anyway. Even so, his legs somehow made their way forward at the sight of her reflection in the mirror. Like a game of cat and mouse, Shojiro fled through the labyrinth of mirrors. Then, after 4 minutes, that strangely unreal tension ended. The 9th shot of blue light hit inches away from him. It exploded the moment it made impact, launching Shojiro into the opposite wall. Of all the fire he had taken thus far, this shot indisputably brought him closest to death. This is some serious uncanny dodging luck, I swear. Groaning, he collapsed to the floor. His back was on fire with pain. He was not bleeding, and was lucky he could still even scream. Yet his body refused to move. Physically and mentally, he still had something to spare. The pain was not so bad that he couldn't get back up. It was just that there was a skylight above him, and he could glimpse the dark of the night sky beyond. The feeling that overcame him was a raw, selfish bout of grief. Oh, it was just so cruel. To have to stare at that for the remainder of whatever short life he had left. Shojiro's ragged breath slowed. For all intents and purposes, he had given up. He had given up fleeing from the pursuing footsteps and perhaps even the root of all his problems.
まあ、青崎に殺されるならいいかな。
Shojiro Suzuki felt things that in other circumstances he would never feel. Incidentally, without exaggeration or embellishment, this was the only mistake he had ever made in his entire life. Staring vacantly into the night sky above, Shojiro listened as the footsteps drew nearer.
Give up?
It was the closest her voice had ever been to him. Perhaps feeling that he had really given up, she approached his collapsed form. In the dark, mirror-lined corridor, He could not make out her expression. Without a word, Shojiro raised his eyes to meet his murderer.
返事がないならそれでいいけど。調子狂うわ。普通どうして殺そうとするのかぐらい聞くものじゃない？
Aoko spoke from within the shadows. His eyes widened in bewilderment. Now that she had mentioned it, he realized that would have been the obvious question to ask. He had more or less picked up on the fact that he was being killed for learning some secret, but it was human nature to want to know more.
そっか。それは、そうなるな。
A simple affirmation. His face was a mixture of resignation and forlorn longing. He thought for a moment before.
でも言う必要はない。聞きたくないんだ。そういうのは。
He responded in a mature, subdued voice. His response was clear, rather gallantly so.
そう。じゃ、殺すけど。死ぬの怖くないの？
怖いに決まってる。何より痛そうだ。
Well, if Aoko has anything to say about it, it's gonna hurt. His face turned wry as he objected, to which Aoko frowned. Nonchalant as he could be, he was honest about his feelings.
そりゃ怖いでしょ。私だって怖いと思うし。でも悪いわね。我慢して。人でなしと罵ってくれて結構よ。今の私は本当にその通りだから。そういった意味じゃあんたと同じ。普通の道徳がないのよ。だから必要なら人も殺せる。
Shujiro's fingers twitched in response to her indifferent tone, as if to say that despite having given up on just about everything, his body could not let those words slide.
人殺しなんて良くないぞ。
分かってるって言ってるでしょ。
Aoko raised her right hand. The light from the crest illuminated her face. It goes without saying that her expression was unchanged. She was not crying, nor was she smiling. She was a young woman who had excised her feelings. Deal with it was just another thing Shojiro could not let slide. Shojiro could read on Aoko's face that she was not herself. She was in pain, and to a degree he had never seen in her.
すまない。ちょっといいかな。
何？ここまで悲壮感を盛り上げておいて、やっぱり逃げるなんてのは却下よ。
He unconsciously smiled at Aoko's ruthless counter and breathed a sigh of relief. He had misread the pain he saw on her face. This was the same Aoko. Shojiro laughed out loud in genuine joy, a laugh that most other people would have taken as an insult.
遺言でも聞いてあげようと思った私が甘かった。っていうか、今の小バカにした笑いがあんたの遺言ってことで OK？
いや、そうじゃなくて、あそこにいる人は青崎の友人なのか？
Out of nowhere, Shojiro pointed behind Aoko.
はあ
Aoko thought it must have been that old, overused distraction technique. If this had been a Japanese comedy act, this would have been the part where she gave him a whack with a paper fan. But after giving it a second thought, she realized Shojiro didn't have the capacity for understanding old or even new tricks.
あんた何言って。
Perhaps his honest disposition had been to his benefit. Without thinking, Aoko gave in to her curiosity and turned around, her gaze toward the distraction in which his finger was pointed. And there, something that should not have been there in the maze, something with a creaking wooden smile. It was the ominous, creepy, uncanny figure of a girl. An unusual figure with 2 arms and 2 legs stood silently in the darkness. If only for a moment, its beauty, which was even apparent from afar, dulled the instant of the current situation, or insanity of the current situation. Oh snap! Extend, extend, extend! The utterly unknown threat made Aoko freeze on the spot. Avoiding it didn't even occur to her. Humans possess intelligence and knowledge, but when confronted with the unknown, they fail to process what to do, and... Oh snap, Aoko took that hit! A shriek escaped Aoko's mouth. The magical attack crossed the 30-foot gap in an instant. The arm of the girl who had appeared at the rear of the corridor was slender and quick. It extended to near impossible length, striking Aoko from behind. Aoko crashed into the wall as she fought back in anguished whimper. The attacker retracted her arm.
Aozaki!
Shojiro sprang to his feet. He darted to her side and used all the strength he could muster to get her to her feet. He could not believe how light she was. In Shojiro's mind, Aoko was an extraordinary individual. He expected that if he were to ever touch her, it would be apparent she was far stronger than he. But in reality, she felt about as heavy as you would expect a 100-pound girl to feel. Meanwhile, that thing continued to reel in its arms as if it were some sort of mechanism. Having extended more than 30 feet from the elbow joint, it clanked as it returned to its previous shape and size.
大丈夫か?
やめてよ。わからないわ。なんでそんな顔できるの?
Aoko tore her hand away from Shojiro's. Suddenly, she felt her knees buckle from under her, but Shojiro caught her before she could hit the ground and helped her to her feet.
無理するな。で、あいつは知り合いか？
He looked back at the eerie shadow 30 feet away as it finished retracting its arm.
そうね。似たようなやつとは命をせめぎ合った仲よ。
Aoko grabbed her lower back as she answered. Searing pain shot through her.
でも、痛いっちゃ痛いけど、打撲だけ。あれだけ絶好の奇襲をしておいて。それとも、この距離じゃ当たっても致命傷にならない。なんて、あるわけないか。何か別の意味があると見るべきね。
You better figure it out quick, Aoko. Aoko tried to steady her breathing as she assessed the damage done to her back. The pain was quick to fade and her breathing returned to normal. For the time being, her motor functions were no longer hindered, which meant the real damage was elsewhere.
青崎、あれ。
分かってるわ。黙ってて。
Blue light glowed across the gloom. The magical energy generated by her breathing was accumulating in her right arm. If magical energy was fuel, the formula was the igniter. For Aoko, this was little more than a reenactment of 2 evenings ago. Next time the puppet extended its arm, Aoko would fire a magic bullet as fast as she could. A battle at approximately 30 feet. As long as Aoko could secure a 2-second window, she could create a counterattack to end their duel. It made its move. With its head tilted down, there was no expression to be seen, and in the darkness, its apparent age was impossible to make out. To the 2 humans, the puppet was not dissimilar to a faceless ghost. Its left arm slowly came up with a grinding sound. Its movements were dull, as if the joints were rusty. The right arm, which it extended earlier, hung at its side. Though the puppet's mouth was hidden by its long locks, the sense was that it was smiling.
さっきと用途が違う。あれが本命。しずきくん、どいて。
She threw herself into Shojiro and extended her hand. Its arm extended at that very moment. The timing was impeccable. In a single second, Aoko's snap bullet scored a direct hit on the puppet's arm, throwing it off its trajectory and sending it crashing into the puppet's body with a violent explosion. Or at least, that is what would have happened had the magic formula been invoked. Oh, Aoko just about took that in the head. She barely avoided being struck once again. When her magecraft failed her, her intuition took over and she just managed to get away.
やられた。最初のはそういうことか。
She clenched her teeth in frustration, her thoughts racing a mile a minute. Fight or flight. It only had one arm left, which could take time to retract. This was the best shot Aoko had at defeating it. If he could evade the right arm, just a fraction, she could get close enough to...
Vivo insomni, solitare putresque inferis. Ictius meus obitus dies, et meus nativus dies, Teobeam.
A crackle echoed through the corridor. The poetic murmurs contained enough magical energy for a mage to perceive. The verse itself was Latin, but it contained hints of the language of curses, Gondar. Originally, they were words meant to curse a hated adversary. However,
Mea animae mortalis, otem me futura negata sunt. Manes sum, animam definire ambiguum est. Teodi et te am, conveniamus insomnio ipso.
the puppet was directing the words at itself. Curses beget curses. The victim calls down a curse on the assailant, creating a vicious cycle of negativity. The incantation was meant to do just that. However, it was ultimately a one-puppet show. An unprecedented source of power akin to auto-intoxication. As unbelievable as it seemed, the cycle of curses had been turned into a perpetual motion device.
何それ、レベル高すぎじゃない。
Aoko abandoned the idea of digging her heels in. It was time to flee with all due haste.
何してんの、あんたも来る。
She grabbed Shojiro's hand and ran as fast as she could deeper into the realm of mirrors. The crackling voice continued its murmuring behind them.
Proximi mich negligentes ferunt, omnes nos peccantes fims, et omnes nos edem fims, omnes nos peccatores sums. Venite domum meum, lut simile somnium, et pulvere simile quotidianum, corprebo, te judico.
Aoko fought against the pain in her back as she ran through the mirrored corridor. She dragged Shojiro by the hand.
青崎、傷は？
別に背骨が痺れてる程度よ。内臓は平気だし、出血もないみたい。
She cursed inwardly at how much of a mess she felt, though. Unlike Shojiro, Aoko did not run into any transparent walls. Thanks not to superior sight, but rather preparation, she'd hammered the layout of the building into her memory.
平気ってわかるのか？
そりゃ自分の体だもの。身体管理は基礎中の基礎よ。
I mean, everybody should know their own body. Let's face it. Aoko's matter-of-fact answer contrasted with Shiro's nervous questioning. The corridor grew shorter with each and every left turn. At first, they were able to advance in a straight line for about 100 feet at a time. But by now, they were forced to turn a corner every 50 feet or so.
あいつはあの夜の。
多分ね。同じタイプだと思う。貴重なオートマタを惜しげもなく使い捨てるなんて、よっぽどお金持ちなんだろうけど。
Shojiro furrowed his brows. He was grateful that she was answering his questions, but baffled by the strange words she was using.
青崎ストップ。もう随分走ったぞ。あいつは曲がり角一つ分向こうだ。少し休もう。
His words suggested that he was still concerned about her injuries. Aoko shook her head in irritation.
あの距離を狙ってくる相手に通路一つ分のリードは無意味よ。せめて二つ分に行くまで走るの。
Shojiro nodded. With the matter settled, he asked,
なんで俺を連れて行ってるんだ？
I mean, fair question.
逃げられたくないからじゃない、バカ。
Fair. Okay. Answering curtly, Aoko glared at her naive prey. The two of them headed for the next corner. Their legs began to slow as they rounded one more. Aoko rubbed her back as she tried to catch her breath. Though Aoko had insisted that she was fine, it appeared to have been bravado. Even the usual clueless Shojiro felt the desperation they were in. He stood behind Aoko with his arms folded. While they had a moment, he tried to make sense of everything. First, Aoko had nearly killed him. Though he was saved at the last possible second, it was by a strange, stretchy woman who Aoko had burned to ashes 2 nights prior. He could barely make out that night, but he considered it a her because it looked female. The woman's attacks wounded Aoko's back and forced her to flee. Aoko had taken Shojiro with her, claiming that the reason she did so was to prevent her prey from escaping. In other words...
青崎はまだ諦めてないんだな。
No. She is definitely not.
当たり前よ。あんなやつ、仮に2体と半分始末しても、あんた用の余力は残せるわ。
Oh, really? So you put your money where your mouth is, Aoko. Her tone was sharp, but even Shojiro could see that she was struggling to stay confident. The damage to her body was too much to afford her any optimism. Still, the fury in her eyes refused to accept her circumstances.
中がところどころショートしてる。あの右腕は回路を混戦させるジャミングってわけね。
Through the proper response, she would have been... Wow. Though the proper response would have been for her to tremble in fear, she did nothing but shake her fist in anger. The disruption of formulae was only supposed to work on absolute beginners. If it had been her roommate, the arm would have been repelled the instant it hit her, and the attacker's circuits burned out, rather than her own. Attempting to establish a link to the magic circuits of another mage was like presenting your heart on a silver platter. It would be of no use in a battle against a superior mage. And yet, her adversary had been designed to do just that. Coupled with the attacks on areas of Mizaki under Aoko's jurisdiction these last few weeks, it was a clear statement from the enemy, who had revealed itself as a fellow mage 2 days ago. In other words, the puppet saw Aoko as no threat at all.
敵ながら正確な判断だこと。
While she was still angry, the whirlwind of emotions within her started to fade. Her face was that of a hunter far beyond her years.
なんか俺の時より真剣だな。
まあね、あんたの時は遊びが入ってたし。
Only playing with poor Shujiro. Ouch. Shujiro was not sure whether to be happy or sad at that. I choose sad. I'd be sad at that. Yep.
わからないことだらけで何を聞いていいかわからないんだけど、一つだけいいか。
Aoko didn't respond. Her eyes were focused on the darkness before them. The silence was heavy, and the darkness was like a noise closing in on them. But Shujiro continued in spite of her indifference.
青崎はあいつも殺すのか。
Well, that is the plan, probably. A stillness fell over them. It was as if the gloom was pulling them in. No response. Their breathing was the only sound echoing in the dim corridor. There stood Shujiro, forcing her to confront her sins, and the magician girl who continued to ignore him. They spent a few seconds seemingly frozen in time.
そう。それがあなたのキーワードみたいね。
Aoko whispered in a lifeless tone. Her sigh was tinged with both resignation and contempt.
何？
独り言よ、忘れて。それと、言っとくけど、あいつは人間じゃないわ。信じられないだろうけど、自分の意志で動く人形なの。この前のも、今のやつもね。
Sojiro nodded as he processed the information. Not only did he not doubt her story, but he seemed to have accepted it at face value.
なんか落ち着いてるわね、あなた。
まさかもう何が何だかわからないからあまり考えないことにしてるだけだ。
I don't want to think too hard about it. Probably wise choice there,
た
bud.
だ人形に関しては別にどうということはない。
もしかして他でも自動人形を見たことあるとか？
Well, other than 2 days ago?
都会の人形ってああいうものじゃないのか？
No, my guy. Ah. She barely stopped herself from falling to her knees. Of course, how could she have forgotten? She was dealing with a bona fide, natural-born moron. A student who transferred from the isolation of the mountains like an endangered species. His utter lack of common sense rendered anything miraculous as mundane. If automobiles were moving hunks of metal, then moving puppets were nothing to write home about. Wait, that meant... To him, the incident from the other night hadn't been extraordinary at all. He might have even assumed that it was an everyday occurrence in the city.
参った。いっぺん頭の中覗いてみたいっていうか、ほんと、ここまで来ると感心する
I'm
わ。
not sure anybody wants to take a trip inside Shojiro's head. I'm not sure you'd find a lot.
調子が狂うのも当然だった。普通は私に襲われた時点でもっと違う反応をするはずなのに。化け物とか、お化けとかさ。でもあなたにとっては、そういうこともある。で済まされてたわけなん
Yep,
だ。
that's about how it works.
なんかバカみたいね、私。
Poor Haoko's the moron in this situation. Her strained face returned to normal for a moment. It hit her. There had been another way to handle this without anyone getting hurt. But the damage had already been done. There were no do-overs in life, nor should there be. Her own mistaken assumptions had sent that situation spiraling out of control. But now that Shojiro was involved, she had to make sure that her secret was safe with him. Even if there had been another, better option, that ship has sailed. Human relationships were ultimately driven by mutual misunderstandings. They were like tapestries woven from mismatched intentions. Break time was over. There stood Aoko Awazaki and Shojiro Suzuki. Their first ever idle conversation had come to an end. Not that they had a choice in the matter. It was the jarring murmuring from around the corner that cut it short.
Nemo nus meminit, vidroit extinct est. Initio eraberamus dom brevimus dolores sunt. Nemo adiuvat.
The enemy was just around the corner, visible in the mirrors parallel to it.
悠長に話してる場合じゃないわね。とにかく。
Oh shit. In contrast to Aoko's elegant blues, its light were a merciless red.
ガンダ打ち。
Yes, Gonder shots. There was a momentary flash of light before she even extended her arms. But the instant she saw the enemy, her dormant fingers erupted once more.
さっきから邪魔なのよ。
She channeled all of her pent-up anger and shunted it into her right arm. The fog that filled the corridor was no magical weaving, but rather a barrier of raw energy. It was equivalent to setting ablaze 3 buckets of gasoline to create a wall of fire in hope it would stop an arrow in flight. If the puppet had attacked with its arm, it could have pierced such a wall easily, but because it had loosed curses with no defined form, the wall of energy repelled the attack. It was a huge waste of magical energy. It was the only means Aoko had to protect herself at that very moment. Unfortunately, its protection was reserved for Aoko alone. Oh, Shojiro just took a Gonder. Shojiro held his hand to his mouth. Well, the curse had been weakened to the point where Aoko could no longer feel it. It had plenty of effect on Shojiro, who was not a mage. As if it understood this fact, the puppet turned gaze from Aoko to the unanticipated human behind her.
こいつは関係ないでしょ
Enraged, she swung her arm forward once again. The blue light formed a wall to block the Gondor for a scant few seconds. It was enough of an opening to exploit. Just as Aoko was forming the wall, the puppet pointed its right arm at her face and...
関係あるみたいだから逃げるぞ。
The heck? Sorry about that, guys. I'm not sure what happened to... Not sure what happened there for a second. How he mustered the strength to do so was a mystery, but he turned his back on the puppet and took off running. He was a nimble sprinter, resembling a deer leaping across obstacles. Shojiro rounded two more corners. There's a little bit of lag between you. Ignoring whatever complaints Aoko was making. And eventually stopped in the middle of the second floor. He set her down.
よし、ここまで来れば少しは休めるな。
Shojiro's shoulders heaved as he caught his breath. As light as she was, running while carrying someone else would make anyone winded. She looked up at him in incomprehension.
こんな体力あったのに、なんで
It made no sense to her. If he had the stamina to pick her up and run, surely he could have stood up and escaped when he'd been downed earlier.
ああ、あの時は諦めてたから。
His words were unfiltered as ever. Though right then, fighting for their lives, he lacked some of his usual absent-mindedness.
諦めてたってどうし
さあ、忘れた、そんなことは。
Though he may have turned away because he regretted saying it out loud, his words spoke volumes. For some reason, it pained Aoko to see him like that.
それより青崎、唐突に気分が悪いんだが、あの赤い光も、その...
Yeah, it would have been the Gondor you took.
ええ、魔術の類よ。ガンド打ちって言ってね。北欧の呪詛の一つ。
Alright, just to let
魔術
everyone
回路のある
know, I
私には
think
効か
we
ない
can
けど、
wrap it up here in about
抵抗のないあ
15
なたには
minutes,
効果てきめんみたいね。
give or take.
なんだ、青崎には効かないのか。じゃあ、危ないのはあの腕だけだな。
Aoko had no idea why he was so relieved, but she gritted her teeth and fought down the urge to snap at him. There was no use in yelling at a time like this. Above all, she felt that it would have been petty in the extreme to voice her annoyance right now.
そうね。注意するのは伸ばしてくる腕だけ。大した相手じゃないわ、やっぱり。
This time, it was not false bravado. Such an enemy would normally be a breeze for Aoko Awazaki. But her shameful negligence had led to the disruption of her magic circuits, making her even less formidable than her enemy. At this point, Aoko had no way of attacking. The only option left to her was to wait for it to expend all of its magical energy. But its perpetual curse machine made that a non-starter. This game of tag would not end until one of them was dead. She realized that she was in the same position she had cornered Shojiro earlier. She glanced at her right arm. She could not imagine how she had gotten into such a mess with her magical energy at more than half its capacity. This had to be karma for having enjoyed toying with Shojiro earlier.
呆れた。いるところにはいるものね、神様って。
She grumbled under her breath as she shifted her focus. She had the fuel for the fire, but not the igniter. And that killing machine would chase her until the end of time if need be. What she should do next was blindingly clear. She had to get back to normal.
青崎、
ごめん、考え事してた。確か、よし、合ってる。しずきくん、そこに横道あるのわかる？
Aoko pointed, but he could see nothing but the walls of the corridor. For one thing, the floor had nothing but left turns, and Aoko was pointing to the right.
2階は中心まで行くと1階に降りる階段があるんだけど、それは私が壊したから使えないの。けど、ここの作りも意地が悪くてね。よく見れば、右に曲がる通路もあるのよ。上級者だけにわかる抜け道ってやつ。
Apparently you're a hardcore fan of this place then, Aoko.
あとは注意して探せば、1階の階段までショートカットできる。悪いけど、一人で行って。
Aoko turned her back to Shojiro and started walking. Walking in the opposite direction of the escape route and down the long corridor toward the puppet in pursuit.
あいつは無差別だから、ここで壊さないといけない。魔術師は、魔術師同士で争うのはいいんだけど、みだりに一般人に手を出しちゃいけないって決まりがあるの。あいつの目的は私のわけだし、結果がどうあれ、すっきりするでしょ。
If Aoko won, the puppet would be destroyed. If Aoko lost, its objective would be complete, and it would shut down. Either way, them going their separate ways would mean Shojiro survived. This is what Aoko meant. Though she explained it as if the events were happening to two totally different people.
運が良ければ入り口までたどり着けるわ。それじゃあ、また明日ね。
Even Shojiro could tell she was trying to act tough. But she'd already disappeared around the corner by the time he thought to stop her. Mentally, Aoko bemoaned the disaster she was in. The quality of this puppet was on a completely different level compared to the one from the park 2 days ago. An auto-incantating perpetual motion machine was a rarity in and of itself, but this puppet was also equipped for battle with its extending arms and Gondor projecting crystalline eyes. It was a first-class product that, if put on the market, would sell for hundreds of millions of yen. although that was only when factoring in its value as an antique. For the purposes of combat, it would have made more sense to mobilize a significantly less expensive familiar. To use such a precious commodity as a tool for murder marked this puppet's master as a completely different breed of crazy from the enemies she had faced up until now.
Vivo in som solitare putresque inferis. Ictius mers obitus dies, et mers nativus dies, Theobeam.
来たわね。
The sound of crackling music box filled the air. The automata, animated by its own curses, approached. The corridor measured approximately 30 feet in length. Aoko lay in wait around the corner further down the hall, anticipating the puppet's appearance. This was not to buy Shojiro time to escape, far from it. Aoko had concluded that she couldn't make a break for it under the current circumstances. Even if she did try to escape and by some miracle made it out of the House of Mirrors, that was as far as she would go. Outside with no cover, Aoko would quickly be overtaken and skewered from behind. As long as her magecraft was disabled, escape was impossible. Instead, she chose to force the enemy back. Her situation was not the most favorable, but neither was the puppet's. Though this narrow hall gave Aoko no place to run, it in turn prevented the puppet from reaching full speed. That was the weak point of this machine. Automata of this era had a tendency to struggle with minute changes in speed.
セット。
She flowed energy into her shorted circuits. Her blood flow and magical energy supply were unstable. It would be difficult to construct a formula in this state. All she could do was harden her right arm by imbuing it with as much energy as she could. Doing so turned her arm into an improvised weapon, like a hammer or bat, assuming she could manage to get in close combat range. This was the best she could do. All she needed now was a plan of attack. The question wasn't what weapon to use, but how to use the weapon she had. The simplest way would be to use the mirror's reflection to hide and then rush the puppet from its blind spot, except for one major problem. It didn't have a sense of sight in the first place. The puppet's view of the world around it did not stem from visual feedback, but from mapping the topography of its surroundings. In theory, it was the same as a bat's echolocation. The environment could be measured based on the emissions and return of high-frequency sound waves. Those chants served as sensor pulses. As far as the puppet was concerned, the mirrors were no better than transparent planes, making even the thought of an ambush laughable.
近づけば近づくほどよりリアルに察知される。本当は遠距離からの狙撃が最適なんだけど、ガンドを撃ってくるならフィンの一撃ぐらい隠してるわよね。
Gondor was Scandinavian in origin, and considering its simplicity, highly versatile. It It was most effective at impairing a target's health by pointing a finger. A single action magecraft. It was limited to only causing illness, but there was a secret technique said to be the greatest mastery of the Gondor shot. The Finn shot. It could do more than cause simple illness. It was a deadly curse that could stop the heart. The wound on her back set her nerves on fire. An unarmed girl and a deadly automaton. It was clear that she was on the one destined for death. She considered her slim chance of survival when a vision sent chills down her spine. Quietly using everything she could to clamp down on the feeling, Aoko faced her all too familiar illusion. She clenched her teeth to keep from making a deafening clatter. But there, the sensation of her fingers crawling up her neck, behind her the specters stared and laughed. This alone made Aoko want to bolt. On top of it all, when Aoko tried to mentally simulate the coming fight, she estimated a 2 in chance of dying in the first 5 seconds. 20%. At times, her predictions were harsher than reality. If Aoko fought the puppet 10 times, she would die twice. She could not stop herself from visualizing her own corpse. She imagined herself collapsing, crumbling under the puppet's curse. Her eyeballs swollen like a blowfish, blood and other fluids oozing from her every bodily orifice. 1 in 5. 1 in 5. 1 in 5. 1 in 10. Chance of death was bad enough, but 1 in 5? It drove her crazy. Aoko forced down her heart as it tried to escape from her mouth. Taking a deep breath, she peered at her own reflection. She thought back to that white night, half a year ago. Then she decided nothing compared to that. 6 months ago, at the Konoji estate, the Hound of White Roses, the wandersnut that appeared from within the thick fog, had killed Aoko 100 times out of 10.
Mea animae brutalis, autem eftura negata sunt. Manes sum, animam definire ambiguum est.
Dark curse shattered Aoko's daydream. It was only 30 feet away. The puppet rounded the corner. Either side stood in shadow, their forms indistinct. Puppet gave no warning. Without preamble, it swiftly fired a Gondor barrage. Just as Aoko planned, the curses fizzled as they hit her mist-like barrier of magical energy. The protection would only last a few seconds, giving her just enough time to Its stretchable spear sprang toward Aoko's face.
Bingo!
The lethal weapon grazed her cheek. All her experience analyzing puppet attack patterns gave her the wherewithal to evade the attack by a hair's breadth. It was one thing if a puppeteer were pulling the strings, but autonomous dolls had their limitations. Aoko had bet everything on this killing machine following a predefined template. The puppet would use a given attack for a given range, and she could adjust her tactics to that.
Ikeru! このまま!
Alright guys, well, we're gonna stop here for today. I'd like to thank everyone for coming out to today's stream. I really appreciate it. One thing before we go, our next Fate Samurai Remnant episode will be coming out on Friday, so we'll be watching for that. Also, we'll be posting when our next stream will be, probably in the next couple days. So also be looking for that. Alright, well, we'll see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.